Have you ever noticed that the way you used to eat, the way you used to move, the way your body used to respond to life, no longer works quite the same way? It's a quiet realization that creeps up gradually. A meal that once left you feeling energized now leaves you feeling heavy. An exercise routine that once produced results now seems to barely maintain them. The frustrating part isn't just the change itself, but the confusion about what to do next. Because most of what we've been told about health was designed for younger bodies, for different circumstances, for a version of ourselves that no longer exists. What if the problem isn't you, but the advice you've been following? What if a different approach exists? One that works with your body as it is now, not as it was decades ago. That's exactly what we're going to explore in this film. You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. The art of living well. A thoughtful examination of health and longevity. There comes a moment, often quietly and without warning, when the conversation about health shifts. For decades, it may have been about looking a certain way or achieving a particular athletic goal. But somewhere along the path, usually after 50, the questions become deeper. They are no longer simply about appearance or performance, but about something more fundamental. How do I want to feel in the years ahead? What kind of energy do I want to carry with me through each day? And perhaps most importantly, how do I build a life that supports not just surviving, but truly living well for as long as possible? These are not questions with simple answers, nor should they be. The human body, in all its complexity, does not respond to formulas or rigid prescriptions. It responds to patterns, to rhythms, to the accumulated effect of countless small choices made consistently over time. What follows is an exploration of those patterns, an examination of what thoughtful observers have noticed about the way human beings age, and what strategies have emerged for those who wish to age not just slowly, but well. The changing landscape of the body after 50. To understand why certain strategies become more relevant after 50, it helps first to understand what is happening beneath the surface. The body at 50 is not the same body it was at 30, and pretending otherwise is a recipe for frustration rather than progress. One of the most significant shifts involves the way the body handles energy. For decades, the prevailing model of metabolism was relatively simple. Eat food, break it down into glucose, use that glucose for immediate energy, and store the remainder for later. This system worked reasonably well for most people during their younger years, when activity levels were higher and the metabolic machinery was more forgiving. But as the decades pass, the cells that make up that machinery begin to change their behavior. They become less responsive to the signals that tell them to take in glucose. This phenomenon, which researchers call reduced insulin sensitivity, means that the same amount of food that once provided steady energy now more easily tips into storage mode. The body becomes more efficient at holding onto energy reserves and less efficient at releasing them. This is not a flaw in design, but rather a feature of biology that served human ancestors well. In an environment where food was scarce and periods of famine were common, a body that held tightly to its energy stores had a survival advantage. But in the modern environment, where food is abundant and physical labor is optional, this same adaptation can work against us. Alongside these metabolic changes come shifts in the hormonal landscape. The endocrine system, which orchestrates everything from sleep to stress response to reproductive health, operates differently after 50. For women, the transition through menopause represents a profound reorganization of hormonal signaling. For men, testosterone levels decline gradually but meaningfully. These changes affect not only how the body looks, but how it feels, how it recovers from activity, and how it responds to different types of food. The digestive system, too, undergoes change. The production of digestive enzymes may decrease. The muscular contractions that move food through the intestines may slow. The community of microorganisms living in the gut, now understood to play a role in everything from immunity to mood, may shift in composition. Foods that were once easily tolerated may suddenly seem problematic. None of this is cause for alarm. It is simply the reality of being a living organism moving through time. The question is not how to stop these changes, but how to work with them, how to adjust strategies so that they remain effective in a body that is itself changing. The principle of metabolic flexibility. Among the most useful concepts to emerge from the study of human metabolism is that of flexibility. A flexible metabolism is one that can efficiently switch between different fuel sources depending on what is available and what is needed. Consider how this works in practical terms. After a meal containing carbohydrates, the body breaks those carbohydrates down into glucose. Insulin rises. Glucose enters the cells, and the body runs on this readily available fuel. Any excess is stored as glycogen in the liver and muscles, or as fat in adipose tissue. Between meals, or during periods of physical activity, the body draws down those glycogen stores. If the period without food extends longer, or if activity continues, the body gradually shifts toward burning stored fat for fuel. This is a normal, healthy process. A metabolically flexible body makes this shift smoothly, without dramatic energy crashes or intense cravings. But many modern eating patterns work against this flexibility. When meals are frequent and always contain carbohydrates, the body never has reason to access its fat stores. The machinery for burning fat becomes rusty from disuse. Over time, the body loses its ability to make the switch efficiently. It becomes locked into a glucose-burning mode, reliant on a steady stream of carbohydrates to maintain energy. This is where the concept of strategic carbohydrate intake becomes relevant. By deliberately creating periods of lower carbohydrate intake, the body is gently encouraged to maintain its fat-burning capabilities. It is not about eliminating carbohydrates entirely, which would be both unnecessary and unsustainable for most people. It is about creating a rhythm that keeps both metabolic pathways active and ready. The rhythm that works for one person may not work for another. Some individuals find that alternating days works well, one day with relatively fewer carbohydrates, the next with more. Others prefer a pattern of 2 lower carbohydrate days followed by a day with more carbohydrates. Still others find that a weekly rhythm, with 5 days of moderate eating and 2 days of different composition, fits more naturally with their schedule and preferences. What matters is not the specific pattern, but the underlying principle. Variation. A body exposed to the same input day after day adapts to that input and loses the ability to handle anything else. A body exposed to variation maintains its adaptability. This is true not only of carbohydrates, but of many aspects of health. The strategic use of different eating patterns. Over the years, various eating patterns have emerged as popular approaches to health. Each has its advocates, and each has generated its share of controversy. But when examined dispassionately, each pattern can be seen as a tool, useful in certain situations, for certain purposes, but not necessarily meant to be followed indefinitely. The ketogenic pattern, which involves a very high intake of fats, a moderate intake of protein, and a very low intake of carbohydrates, represents one end of the spectrum. By drastically reducing carbohydrates, this pattern forces the body to rely on fats and ketones for fuel. The metabolic state this produces, known as ketosis, has been studied for its effects on everything from epilepsy to blood sugar regulation. For some individuals, a period of eating in this way can serve as a reset. It can break the cycle of constant carbohydrate dependence and restore some degree of metabolic flexibility. It can also produce noticeable changes in body composition. as the body becomes more efficient at accessing stored fat. But the very features that make the ketogenic pattern effective in the short term can make it challenging to maintain over years. The social aspects of eating become more complicated. The body's systems for handling stress, which rely in part on carbohydrates, may become strained. The thyroid gland, which regulates metabolic rate, appears to function best with at least some carbohydrates in the diet. This is why many observers have suggested that a cyclical approach makes more sense for long-term health. By spending periods in a state closer to ketosis and periods with more carbohydrates, the body gets the benefits of both patterns without the potential drawbacks of permanent adherence to either. This approach has been called by various names: keto cycling, carb cycling, metabolic switching, but the underlying idea is the same: variation over time. The paleo pattern, which attempts to approximate the eating habits of pre-agricultural human ancestors, offers another set of insights. By emphasizing whole foods, vegetables, fruits, meats, fish, and nuts while excluding grains, legumes, and dairy, this pattern naturally reduces the intake of processed foods and refined carbohydrates. For many people, this alone produces significant improvements in how they feel. The paleo pattern also draws attention to the preparation of foods. Traditional cultures rarely ate grains or legumes without first soaking, sprouting, or fermenting them. These processes neutralize compounds like phytic acid and lectins, which can interfere with mineral absorption and digestion in their raw state. This observation has value even for those who do not follow a strict paleo pattern, choosing sprouted grains over conventional ones, for example, may improve digestibility and nutrient availability. Plant-based patterns, at the other end of the spectrum, offer their own insights. For individuals with certain health conditions, particularly those involving the liver or gallbladder, a period of eating more plant foods and fewer fats may be beneficial. The lower fat load reduces the demand on these digestive organs, allowing them to rest and potentially recover. The key insight across all these patterns is that none of them is inherently correct for everyone at all times. The body changes. Circumstances change. A pattern that serves well in one season of life may need adjustment in another. The wise approach is not to pledge allegiance to a single pattern forever, but to understand the principles behind each and apply them strategically as needs shift. The timing of food relative to activity. One of the most practical insights from the study of metabolism concerns the relationship between when food is eaten and when the body is active. This is not complicated biochemistry, but simple observation. The body uses fuel differently depending on what it is doing at the time. When a person engages in intense physical activity, the muscles demand glucose. This is not a preference, but a necessity. The biochemical pathways that produce energy for high-intensity effort run most efficiently on glucose. Attempting to perform intense exercise without adequate glucose available often results in a feeling of heaviness, sluggishness, or inability to maintain the desired intensity. This observation has practical implications for how food is arranged around activity. On days when the plan includes more demanding exercise, heavy resistance training, high-intensity intervals, prolonged cardiovascular effort, it makes sense to ensure that carbohydrates are available. Eating a meal containing carbohydrates before such activity provides the fuel needed for performance. Eating carbohydrates afterward helps replenish the glycogen stores that were depleted during the effort. On days when activity is lighter, a walk, gentle stretching, yoga, or complete rest, the demand for glucose is lower. On these days, the body can rely more on its stored energy and on fats for fuel. This is not a sacrifice, but simply a matching of fuel supply to demand. This matching principle is straightforward but often overlooked. Many people eat the same way every day, regardless of what their body is doing. They consume the same breakfast, the same lunch, the same dinner, whether they are about to run a marathon or sit at a desk for 8 hours. The body, being adaptable, manages this as best it can. But it is not the most efficient use of fuel. And over time, this inefficiency can contribute to unwanted changes in body composition and energy regulation. A more thoughtful approach involves looking ahead at the week and considering when the more demanding activities will occur. Those are the days to ensure adequate carbohydrates are available. The lighter days are the ones where carbohydrates can be more limited. This is not a rigid system requiring precise calculations, but a general orientation that brings eating patterns into better alignment with actual needs. For those who exercise regularly, this approach also addresses a common complaint: the feeling of having nothing in the tank. When low-energy days coincide with high-demand activities, the experience can be discouraging. But when the pattern is reversed, high-demand activities scheduled on days with adequate fuel, the experience is entirely different. The body has what it needs when it needs it, and the activity feels sustainable rather than punishing. The quality of carbohydrates. Discussions about carbohydrates often devolve into oversimplified arguments about whether they are good or bad. This framing misses the more important question, which is not whether to eat carbohydrates, but which carbohydrates to eat and under what circumstances. Not all carbohydrates are created equal. At one end of the spectrum are refined carbohydrates, white flour, white rice, sugars, and the countless products made from them. These foods enter the bloodstream quickly, causing a rapid rise in blood glucose and a corresponding surge in insulin. They provide energy, but they do so in a way that stresses the regulatory systems of the body. Over time, a pattern of frequent refined carbohydrate consumption can contribute to the reduced insulin sensitivity mentioned earlier. At the other end of the spectrum are whole food carbohydrates that come packaged with fiber, water, and a variety of micronutrients. Vegetables, fruits, legumes, and whole grains in their minimally processed forms release their glucose more slowly. The fiber they contain slows digestion and tempers the blood sugar response. The water they provide contributes to hydration. The vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients they carry support the countless chemical reactions that keep the body functioning. Between these extremes lies a wide middle ground. Starchy vegetables like potatoes and sweet potatoes offer more concentrated carbohydrate than leafy greens, but they also provide nutrients and, when eaten with their skins, fiber. Whole fruits contain natural sugars, but they also contain water, fiber, and a complex array of beneficial compounds that are not found in fruit juice or dried fruit concentrates. Grains, when properly prepared through sprouting or fermentation, become more digestible and their nutrients more available. The practical implication is straightforward. When carbohydrates are eaten, they are best obtained from sources that are as close to their natural state as possible. A baked sweet potato is a different food than sweet potato fries cooked in industrial oil. An apple is a different food than apple juice. Sprouted rice is a different food than white rice that has been milled to remove its bran and germ. This principle applies regardless of the eating pattern being followed. On days when more carbohydrates are part of the plan, those carbohydrates can come from these higher quality sources. On days when carbohydrates are more limited, the vegetables that remain on the plate provide carbohydrates as well, but in smaller amounts and packaged with fiber and water. The role of fats in the aging body. Fats have endured a complicated history in nutritional thinking. For decades, they were portrayed as the primary enemy of health, the cause of heart disease and weight gain. More recently, this view has been revised as researchers have come to appreciate the complexity of different types of fats and their varied effects on the body. What has emerged from this revision is a more nuanced understanding. Some fats are indeed problematic, particularly the artificially created trans fats found in many processed foods and the highly refined vegetable oils used in industrial food production. These fats appear to promote inflammation and oxidative stress, both of which are relevant to the aging process. But other fats are not merely neutral, but actively beneficial. The fats found in olives and olive oil, in avocados, in nuts and seeds, in fatty fish, and in coconut play essential roles in the body. They are structural components of cell membranes. They are involved in the production of hormones. They are necessary for the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. They provide a concentrated source of energy that can be particularly valuable when carbohydrates are limited. For the aging body, adequate fat intake serves several important purposes. As insulin sensitivity gradually declines, the ability to efficiently use carbohydrates for fuel diminishes. Fats become an increasingly important alternative fuel source. Maintaining the metabolic machinery for burning fats requires that they be present in the diet on a regular basis. Fats also contribute to satiety, the feeling of satisfaction after eating. Meals that include adequate fat tend to be more satisfying and to stave off hunger for longer periods. This can be helpful for anyone trying to maintain a stable weight without constant hunger or preoccupation with food. For those who have had their gallbladder removed, a common surgical procedure, the digestion of fats requires additional attention. The gallbladder's role is to store and concentrate bile, which emulsifies fats and prepares them for digestion. Without it, the flow of bile into the small intestine is less coordinated with fat intake. This can lead to discomfort when large amounts of fat are consumed at once. The solution is not to avoid fats entirely, but to distribute them more evenly throughout the day and to consider digestive support in the form of enzymes or bile salts when needed. The question of protein. Protein occupies a unique position in discussions of aging. Unlike carbohydrates and fats, which are primarily sources of energy, protein provides the amino acids that serve as building blocks for the body's structures. Muscles, bones, skin, hair, enzymes, antibodies, all are built from proteins and require a steady supply of amino acids for maintenance and repair. As the decades pass, the body becomes less efficient at using dietary protein for these purposes. This phenomenon, sometimes called anabolic resistance, means that the same amount of protein that once supported muscle maintenance may no longer be sufficient. The practical implication is that protein intake may need to increase slightly to achieve the same effect. The timing of protein intake also appears to matter. Spreading protein evenly across meals, rather than concentrating it in a single large serving at dinner, may improve its utilization. The body has a limited capacity to use amino acids from any single meal. Excess beyond this capacity is simply oxidized for energy or converted to glucose or fat. By distributing protein throughout the day, more of it can be directed toward its structural roles. The sources of protein also deserve consideration. Animal proteins, meat, poultry, fish, eggs, dairy, provide all the essential amino acids in proportions that closely match human requirements. Plant proteins, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, whole grains, are typically lower in one or more essential amino acids. But combinations eaten over the course of a day can provide complete profiles. For those who include animal foods in their diet, quality matters. Animals raised on their natural diets and in conditions that allow for movement produce meat, eggs, and dairy with different fatty acid profiles than those raised in confined operations. Grass-fed beef, for example, contains a different balance of fats than grain-fed beef. Pastured eggs have a different nutrient profile than eggs from caged hens. Wild-caught fish differ from farmed fish in ways that may be meaningful. For those who follow plant-based patterns, attention to protein combining and overall adequacy becomes more important. Beans and rice, a combination found in countless traditional cuisines, provide complementary amino acids. So do beans and corn, or lentils and millet. Traditional food combinations around the world reflect an intuitive understanding of these principles long before the science of amino acids was understood. The digestive system and its needs. The digestive system is the interface between the external world of food and the internal world of the body. Everything that enters the body must pass through this system, and the condition of the system determines what is extracted from food and what is kept out. With age, the digestive system often becomes less forgiving. The production of stomach acid may decline, reducing the ability to break down proteins and absorb minerals like calcium, magnesium, and iron. The production of digestive enzymes from the pancreas may decrease. The muscular contractions that move food through the intestines may weaken. The community of microorganisms living in the gut may shift in ways that affect digestion, immunity, and even mood. These changes do not happen to everyone, and they do not happen at the same rate. But they are common enough that attention to digestive health becomes increasingly valuable after 50. One of the simplest and most effective strategies for supporting digestion is also one of the oldest: eating slowly and chewing thoroughly. Digestion begins in the mouth, where chewing breaks food into smaller particles and mixes it with saliva containing enzymes that begin the breakdown of starches. When food is rushed, this first phase of digestion is compromised, and the burden on the stomach and intestines increases. Another strategy involves the temperature and preparation of food. Traditional cultures around the world have long understood that some foods are better eaten cooked rather than raw. Cooking breaks down cell walls, making nutrients more accessible. It also denatures proteins and gelatinizes starches, reducing the work required of the digestive system. For those with sensitive digestion, a shift toward more cooked foods, particularly vegetables, and warm soups and stews can be remarkably helpful. Bone broth, a staple in many traditional cuisines, deserves special mention. Made by simmering animal bones with vegetables and herbs for an extended period, bone broth extracts gelatin, collagen, and minerals from the bones. The resulting liquid is easily digestible and provides nutrients that support the health of the digestive tract itself. The gelatin in particular has been studied for its ability to maintain the integrity of the gut lining. Fermented foods represent another category of digestive support. Foods like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, and kombucha contain living microorganisms that can contribute to the gut's microbial community. They also contain compounds produced during fermentation that may have beneficial effects on digestion and immunity. Regular consumption of fermented foods is one way to support the gut microbiome, which in turn supports overall health. The question of food sensitivities. At some point in life, many people notice that foods they once ate without issue now seem to cause problems. Bloating, gas, changes in bowel habits, fatigue after eating, skin issues, or joint discomfort may appear after certain meals. These reactions can be confusing and frustrating, particularly when the foods involved are otherwise considered healthy. Food sensitivities differ from true food allergies in several important ways. Allergies involve a rapid, dramatic immune response that can be life-threatening. Sensitivities involve slower, more subtle responses that may not appear for hours or even days after eating. This delayed timing makes them difficult to identify without systematic observation. The reasons why food sensitivities may emerge with age are not fully understood. Changes in the gut lining, shifts in the microbiome, alterations in immune function, And the cumulative effect of years of exposure to various foods may all play a role. Whatever the cause, the practical response is the same. When a food consistently produces symptoms, it is worth considering whether it serves the body well. Elimination and reintroduction is the most reliable method for identifying problem foods. This involves removing suspected foods from the diet for a period of time, typically 3 to 4 weeks, then reintroducing them one at a time while observing for reactions. The process requires patience and careful attention, but it can provide information that no test can match. Common triggers for food sensitivities include gluten-containing grains, dairy products, eggs, soy, corn, and certain nuts. But any food can potentially be problematic for an individual. The goal is not to create a permanent list of forbidden foods, but to understand the body's responses and make informed choices accordingly. For those with multiple sensitivities, the challenge of maintaining a varied and satisfying diet increases. This is where the expanding variety of alternative foods becomes valuable. Milk alternatives made from almonds, oats, hemp, flax, or coconuts provide options for those avoiding dairy. Flours made from almonds, coconut, cassava, or teff provide options for those avoiding wheat. The modern food environment, for all its problems, also offers more choices for those with specific needs than at any time in history. Movement and the aging body. Food provides the raw materials, but movement determines how those materials are used. A body that moves regularly is a body that maintains its capacity to move. A body that remains sedentary is a body that gradually loses that capacity. This principle applies across the lifespan, but it becomes more evident with age. Muscle mass, which peaks in young adulthood and gradually declines thereafter, is maintained or lost in direct proportion to how much it is used. Bone density, which follows a similar trajectory, responds to the forces placed upon it. The balance between bone formation and breakdown is influenced by physical activity, particularly weight-bearing activity. The type of movement matters as much as the amount. Different activities stress the body in different ways and produce different adaptations. Resistance training, whether with weights, resistance bands, or body weight, places stress on muscles and bones that stimulates them to maintain their strength and density. Cardiovascular activities like walking, swimming, or cycling stress the heart and lungs, maintaining their capacity to deliver oxygen and fuel to tissues. Activities that challenge balance, like Tai Chi or yoga, maintain the neuromuscular coordination that prevents falls. Variety in movement, like variety in food, maintains adaptability. A body that only walks adapts to walking but may be unprepared for the demands of lifting, reaching, or recovering from a stumble. A body that only lifts weights adapts to lifting but may lack the cardiovascular endurance for sustained activity. A balanced approach that includes different types of movement prepares the body for the varied demands of daily life. The timing of movement relative to food intake, discussed earlier, also affects how the body responds. When movement is intense, having adequate fuel available supports performance and recovery. When movement is lighter, the body can rely more on stored energy. This is not a requirement, but an optimization, a way of aligning inputs with demands to get the most from both. For those who have been sedentary, the most important step is simply to begin. The body responds to movement at any age, though the response may be slower than in youth. Consistency matters more than intensity. A daily walk, maintained over months and years, produces cumulative benefits that no occasional burst of intense activity can match. The nervous system and its role in health. The nervous system is the body's communication network, transmitting signals between the brain and every organ, muscle, and tissue. It operates in two primary modes: The sympathetic, often called fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, often called rest and digest. Both are essential, but their balance shifts with circumstances. The sympathetic mode prepares the body for action. It increases heart rate, redirects blood flow to muscles, releases glucose from storage, and sharpens attention. This mode is appropriate during physical activity, during moments of challenge, and in response to genuine threats. But in modern life, it is often activated chronically by psychological stress, by constant stimulation, by poor sleep, and by the simple pace of daily existence. The parasympathetic mode does the opposite. It slows heart rate, directs blood flow to the digestive system, supports digestion and absorption, and promotes repair and recovery. This is the mode in which the body restores itself. It is most active during rest, during sleep, and during periods of calm. The relevance of this to aging lies in the balance between the two. A body that spends too much time in sympathetic mode is a body that is constantly drawing on its reserves, constantly in a state of readiness, constantly burning fuel without adequate time for replenishment. Over time, this pattern contributes to wear and tear on multiple systems. Activities that promote parasympathetic activity become increasingly valuable with age. Deep, slow breathing is one of the simplest and most effective. A few minutes of conscious breathing, with exhalations longer than inhalations, can shift the nervous system toward the rest and digest mode. This is not mysticism, but physiology. The breath is one of the few bodily functions that can be either automatic or voluntary, and using it voluntarily can influence the rest of the system. Gentle movement practices like yoga, tai chi, and qigong also promote parasympathetic activity. These practices combine movement with attention to breath and body awareness, creating conditions for the nervous system to settle. They are not merely exercise, but practices that integrate movement, attention, and relaxation. Time in nature appears to have similar effects. The sights and sounds of natural environments, as opposed to urban environments, are associated with reduced stress markers and increased feelings of calm. This may be another reason why traditional cultures, which lived closer to nature, maintained health into old age without the elaborate interventions of modern medicine. Sleep is perhaps the most important regulator of nervous system balance. During sleep, the parasympathetic mode dominates, and the body performs most of its repair and maintenance work. Adequate sleep is not a luxury, but a necessity for health at any age, and its importance only increases as the years pass. The social dimension of health. Humans are social animals. This is not a philosophical observation, but a biological fact. The human brain evolved in the context of group living, and many of its systems are calibrated for social interaction. Isolation, whether physical or emotional, is registered by the body as a stressor. The evidence for this comes from multiple directions. People with strong social connections tend to live longer than those without. They recover more quickly from illness. They maintain cognitive function longer into old age. The mechanisms behind these observations are not fully understood, but they likely involve the regulation of stress hormones, the support for healthy behaviors that social networks provide, and the simple fact that humans need each other. For those over 50, maintaining social connections often requires more intentionality than in earlier decades. Work, which provides built-in social contact for many people, may end or change. Children may move away. Friends may relocate or become ill. The structures that once provided social contact may no longer be present, and new structures must be created. This is not merely about having people to talk to, though that matters. It is about having people who know you, who care about you, who would notice if something were wrong. It is about having roles and relationships that give meaning and structure to days. It is about being part of something larger than yourself. The forms this takes vary widely. For some, it is family. For others, it is community organizations, religious congregations, volunteer work, or groups built around shared interests. What matters is not the form, but the function. Regular, meaningful contact with others who provide mutual support and recognition. Even for those who are naturally more solitary, some degree of social connection appears to be protective. The optimal amount varies by individual, but the direction is consistent. More connection, up to a point, is associated with better health outcomes. Purpose and its place in longevity. Closely related to social connection is the sense of purpose. Having a reason to get up in the morning. A sense that one's life matters and contributes to something beyond oneself has been linked to better health and longer life in multiple studies. The mechanisms here are less clear than with some other factors, but plausible pathways exist. Purpose may support better self-care, as people who feel their lives have meaning may be more motivated to maintain their health. It may buffer against stress, providing a perspective that reduces the impact of daily frustrations. It may simply make life more worth living, which is itself a form of health. Purpose does not have to be grand or world-changing. It can be found in caring for family, in mentoring younger people, in creative work, in volunteering, in tending a garden, in maintaining a home. What matters is that it feels meaningful to the individual and that it provides a reason to engage with life. For many people, the post-career years offer an opportunity to explore purpose in new ways. Freed from the demands of earning a living, there is time to pursue activities that were previously squeezed into margins. This can be a period of growth and discovery, but it requires intentionality. Purpose rarely arrives unbidden. It is usually found through engagement, through trying things, through showing up and seeing what resonates. The environment and its subtle influences. The environment in which people live exerts influences that are easy to overlook because they are constant. The air, the water, the light, the sounds, the materials that surround us, all affect the body in ways that accumulate over time. Air quality is perhaps the most obvious. Indoor air can be more polluted than outdoor air, depending on what is in the space. Volatile organic compounds from paints, furnishings, and cleaning products can accumulate. Mold in damp areas can release spores and compounds that affect respiratory health. Simple measures like opening windows regularly, using exhaust fans, and choosing less toxic cleaning products can reduce these exposures. Water quality varies by location and by the pipes through which it travels. Municipal water is treated to meet safety standards, but trace amounts of various substances remain. Well water may contain minerals or contaminants from local sources. Filters can address some of these concerns, though the appropriate filter depends on what needs to be removed. Light exposure affects the body's internal clock, the circadian rhythm that regulates sleep, hormone release, and other functions. Bright light in the morning helps set this clock for the day. Dim light in the evening allows it to prepare for sleep. The blue light emitted by screens can interfere with this process, delaying the onset of sleep. Simple adjustments like dimming lights in the evening and avoiding screens before bed can support natural rhythms. Sound, too, affects the body. Chronic noise exposure is associated with increased stress hormones and cardiovascular changes. While some noise is unavoidable, creating periods of quiet, particularly around sleep, can be protective. The materials that come into contact with skin also matter. Personal care products, from soaps to lotions to cosmetics, contain ingredients that can be absorbed. The number of products used and the ingredients they contain vary widely. Reading labels and choosing simpler products with fewer synthetic ingredients reduces exposure to substances whose long-term effects are not fully known. None of this requires perfection. The goal is not to create a sterile environment free of all potential harms, which is impossible. The goal is to be aware of the major influences and to make reasonable adjustments where possible. Small improvements accumulate over time just as small exposures do. The integration of multiple factors. Throughout this exploration, certain themes have recurred. Variation matters more than consistency. Adaptability matters more than optimization. The body responds to patterns over time more than to isolated choices. Health is not a destination to be reached, but a process to be maintained. These themes apply across domains. In eating, variation in what and when we eat maintains metabolic flexibility. In movement, variation in type and intensity maintains physical capacity. In rest, variation between activity and recovery maintains energy. In social connection, variation in contacts maintains a network that can provide different kinds of support. The challenge of aging well is not to find the single perfect approach and adhere to it rigidly. The body changes. Circumstances change. And the approach must change with them. What worked at 40 may not work at 60. What worked in one living situation may not work in another. What worked when healthy may not work when recovering from illness or injury. This is why rigidity in health practices is often counterproductive. A person who believes there is one right way to eat, one right way to exercise, one right way to live, will struggle when that way no longer serves. A person who understands principles rather than rules can adapt, can find new ways that honor the same principles under changed circumstances. The principles themselves are simple, even if their application is not. Eat foods that are as close to their natural state as possible. Move the body regularly in varied ways. Rest adequately and deliberately. Maintain connections with others. Find meaning in daily life. Create an environment that supports rather than undermines health. Attend to the signals the body sends and adjust accordingly. These principles are not new. They appear in the health practices of traditional cultures around the world. They appear in the observations of physicians who have watched patients age over decades. They appear in the research of scientists studying the factors that distinguish those who age well from those who do not. They are, in a sense, rediscoveries of what has always been known. A final reflection. The pursuit of health after 50 is not about stopping the clock or reversing time. It is not about achieving some idealized version of the body that existed decades earlier. It is about living as well as possible in the body that exists now, and in the bodies that will exist in the years to come. This requires a shift in perspective. The question is no longer how to look a certain way or achieve a certain performance metric. The question is how to feel, how to function, how to engage with life. The metrics that matter are not always visible. Energy, mood, resilience, the ability to do the things that matter. These things are not guaranteed, but they are supported by the patterns described here. A body that receives varied, high-quality fuel is better able to maintain its functions. A body that moves regularly is better able to keep moving. A body that rests adequately is better able to recover. A person with connections and purpose is better able to weather the challenges that life presents. None of this is complicated, though it requires attention and intention. The complexity is not in the principles, but in their application to a particular life, with its particular circumstances, preferences, and constraints. Each person must find their own way of honoring these principles, their own balance between structure and flexibility, their own rhythm of eating and moving and resting and connecting. The path is not always straight, and progress is not always linear. There will be periods of ease and periods of difficulty, times when health seems effortless and times when it requires effort. This is normal. The goal is not perfection, but persistence. Not optimization, but adaptation. Not the absence of problems, but the capacity to meet them. In the end, health after 50 is not a project to be completed, but a practice to be maintained. It is not about arriving at a destination, but about continuing the journey, with awareness and intention, for as long as the journey lasts. The single most important thing to understand is this. Health after 50 is not about finding the one perfect formula and following it rigidly forever. It's about understanding principles so deeply that you can adapt them to whatever life brings, to whatever your body needs, to whatever season you find yourself in. We'd love to hear what resonated with you. What questions remain? What experiences you've had on your own journey? The comments section is a place for thoughtful reflection, and we read every contribution. If this film added something valuable to your understanding, you'll find more explorations like it throughout the Longevity Library. Consider subscribing so new wisdom finds its way to you. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.